Last time we started talking about sexually selected traits, and we categorized different types of sexually selected traits up here on the board into whether or not they were between the sexes or within the sexes. So intersexual or between the sexes, male versus female, or intrasexual, male, or in rare cases, female within sex competition and traits. Before we get back to that topic, though, I wanted to go over this concept of the mock exam that I took. I wanted to stress that these are not questions that I wrote, and that these aren't like questions that will necessarily show up on the final, but it's useful to go through these rather quickly, maybe, to try to figure out why some of you answered incorrect answers. And as Connor pointed out, there were very subtle differences between some of the possible answers on this exam. And it's the subtleties in this case, and that's why I like these questions, that are important, that get at whether or not you really have a deep understanding of evolutionary principles. So for each of these, I'm going to tell you which answer. I've selected some of, we're not going to go through all the questions, I've selected some of them that had the worst success rates out of all the questions. So these are the ones where more of you than not answered incorrectly. And I'm going to tell you which one is the correct answer. I'm going to tell you which one was the most commonly chosen incorrect answer. And then we're going to assess what's the difference between the correct answer and the one that most of you wound up choosing. So in this one, and I'm not giving the background for the questions, but what sort of changes in a population occur over time? Correct answer is B. Proportion of finches having different traits change. So talking about big scale, population scale change, genetic changes lead to changes in the population over time. Most commonly chosen incorrect answer, the MCI, was D. So what's the difference between B and D? And this is going to be a theme that shows up again and again. And again, I'm going through this in class because this is a critical thing to understand when we get to the final.
Well, when I look at DIC, mutations occur to meet the needs of the finches. Mutations don't, they're random, so that it's not like they actually just, oh, well, you need this, so here you go. It's not really going to happen like that.
Okay. Francisco? Same thing? Yeah, so that was the subtle difference. And that's true for most of the questions that we'll see. I've chosen about 5 or 6, I think. Right? Mutations don't occur to meet needs, they occur randomly, and if they happen to meet a need at the time when the mutation occurs and changes a phenotype in an individual, then evolution and natural selection can act on that change. 6, 7, and 8, still talking about finches. So for question 6, B is the correct answer, and A was the most common incorrect answer. Again, the most common incorrect answer, there's that word again, need. And that's one of the subtle differences between B, the correct answer, and A lot of you chose, at least a handful of you chose. So those chance occurrences, right, random mutations that happen to suit a need at the time that it's needed, that's how evolution works. It's not that mutations occur because of need. So what type of variation gets passed to the offspring? Question 7. Most commonly incorrect answer was D, so let's rule that one out. So which one is it? C. Any characteristics that were genetically determined based on genetic differences, mutations, right? Heritable genetic differences that occur in a population. And the contrast there being that environmental influences don't get passed from generation to generation. Bodybuilders that work out and get really big muscles don't pass on large muscles to their children necessarily. Let's see, 8. This is going to make it easier to figure out the correct answer, I think. I couldn't distinguish between C and D. Those were tied for the most common incorrect choices. So what causes finches to become different species distributed on different islands? finches were quite variable. Those whose features were best suited to the available food supply in each island reproduced more successfully. Evolutionary principles. Genetic differences causing different abilities to survive and reproduce. So again, I'm going to have to try not to put the word need into any exam questions, because you're probably starting to get the sense that if you see the word need in an exam question, it's usually not the correct answer. Let's see, question 9. So if you've got a natural population of organisms, what are they going to look like when you compare them all? B, most common incorrect. They all share the essential characteristics of the species, and minor variations don't affect survival. Of all of the questions on this mock exam, this was the most subtle one, I think. This question was really divided in two. There were students that chose B, and there were ones that chose D. Right? So if it's one population of guppies, they're all related to each other relatively recently in the past, probably had a common ancestor. So they all look similar, but they will be genetically different because of the random genetic changes that occur, the mutations, and so they're all going to look slightly different. Some of those, the subtle difference here is some of those differences might affect fitness. You don't know it by looking at the population at one point in time. You'd have to study that individual relative to all their other individuals in the population over time to find out if there's a correlation between one of those traits and their fitness. D is the most commonly incorrect answer for 13. Oh dear. Well, so I'm not even going to belabor the point. There's that word again. Mutation occurred to meet the needs of guppies. Definitely not.
B.
Right, so that common evolutionary concept of change in a population over time, gradual change in over time, B is the correct answer there. Oh, I put more of these in than I thought. 2 more left, I believe. So, B was the most commonly incorrect chosen question or answer here. Since lizards eat a variety of foods, there's probably enough food for all the lizards. This is a new concept that we haven't talked about yet today. We've talked about it before. What's the evolutionary principle that this question's after? Competition because of,
Limited resources.
yeah, competition because of limited resources. So there's always going to be some sort of limiting factor that limits the size of a population or the number of individuals you can have during reproduction. And so if it's not B,
It's D.
it's D. It's likely that sometimes there's enough food, at other times there isn't enough food for all the lizards. That puts pressure on those best adapted lizards to be the best at surviving, reproducing, and producing the next generation. Okay. 17. Once again, question B. Something about question B here too. It's always B. Right? When parent lizards develop stronger claws through repeated use, their offspring can inherit stronger claws. Right? That's like Lamarckian inheritance, which we know doesn't happen. It's not traits that you develop over your lifetime you pass on to your kids. It's genetic traits. Once again, the right answer is D. So there's an assumption here that's not made explicit in this answer that having an extra finger or toe or claw is a genetically determined trait. But that was the assumption in that answer. If the extra digit is a genetically based trait, then yes, absolutely, that could be passed on to the next generation. And finally, question 20. A was the most commonly incorrect answer here. So what causes one species to change into multiple species over time? Let's see. So if it's not A, then it's, what sort of speciation model are we talking about when we talk about groups that are physically isolated from each other? That's, which one? Allopatry. So that's allopatric speciation. When two populations are physically separated from each other over a long enough time that each of those populations develops new genetic differences that make them phenotypically different, they look different, they act different, and that they no longer can reproduce with each other if they ever come back together in contact in nature, members of the two different populations. So there. The answer is B. And I know there wasn't a lot of time to take this exam, so don't treat it as though it's an indicator of how you will perform on the final exam, but I wanted to stress these are really critical points for evolution, especially the thing about need versus random genetic mutation. And with that, we turn to necking.
I ever caught on tape, for those of you who keep track of such things. Stunning video from the Discovery Channel shows two giraffes using their 6-foot-long necks as weapons to go after each other. ABC's Paula Ferris has the story.
So one example, we don't even need the audio really, but nor do we need the commentary really from Good Morning America. Yeah, except as we were discussing it before class started, these are two males. So this is intrasexual competition for mates. And although giraffes get that sort of docile concept, I wouldn't want to be a part of this. It makes my throat hurt just watching that. Oh, I love this. This guy knows about giraffes. You know where to stand, how to act, and what the rules are? I don't know, but that's right. So we're gonna have three bouts of 30 seconds. Okay. So that's a reminder of last time we talked briefly about that males have weapons, like horns on the head, sexually selected traits that they sometimes use for combating each other, for access to mates, and then sometimes besides weapons, there are also ornaments. Oh. I should have shown my picture of Chad with his beard styled in a way. He had one where he hung Christmas ornaments in his beard. That would have been perfect. Note for next class. So today the concept that I want to get across is to study a few different types of experiments or experimental methods that scientists use to assess whether or not different types of sexual selection are occurring. So here's one sort of concept in evolution. This is the good genes concept. This has to do with ornaments, not with weapons. So there's an idea that the male tail of peacocks, as we've discussed, is expensive to produce, energetically expensive to produce, and maybe has some side effects, like being heavy to carry around. So there must be something beneficial about it, and this study that's represented in your textbook suggested that there's maybe something directly related to the quality of the tail and something about the quality of the male individual as a mate. So this is a little bit interesting. These scientists are measuring on the x-axis of both of these plots the mean area, the average area of the eye spots of the feathers. So you define some threshold where you consider that's the edge of each eye spot. You measure all the eye spots, you take the average eye spot size. And so that's represented in millimeters, square millimeters, so area on the x-axis here. And then what's the trend we see when we look at their offspring? So here we've got the weight of offspring on the 84th day after birth in grams. So how heavy are your kids, male kids? And then in this plot on the right, they released some chicks into the wild and they wanted to know how many of them survived over some period of time. So what's the trend?
There's a correlation between the size of the eye spot and the weight of the chicks and their survival.
There's some sort of correlation indeed in both of these traits. So it looks like maybe what this says is that if you were a female peacock, if you were a peahen, would you pick a male that had bigger eye spots or smaller eye spots if you wanted to have healthier kids? In both of these traits, it looks like what the female would want to do, if there was any signal to a female about who she should choose to mate with, it would be the ones with the larger eye spots, because they're the ones that have at least correlations where if your eye spots on your tail are bigger, then you tend to have kids that are bigger and live long, or survive better in the wild. Does anybody have any concerns about this? Questions? This is some evidence that's used to suggest that there may actually be sexual signals, in this case that males provide to females, that let females choose who's a healthier male, who's a potentially better mate.
Was there a amazingly large error?
So the error bars are pretty big, but there's still a correlation. But yeah, we could, so what's,
There's survival of released cheeks. Is that like to reproductive age or just like they survive a week?
so that's a perfect question to ask. So if you didn't hear that, she asked, what does percent survival mean? How long do they survive? Survive to adulthood to reproduce, or, and in this case I don't remember what the length of the length over which they checked. Does anybody remember? From the textbook. Let me see. So that was 2 years in the wild, which doesn't tell us anything because I don't remember how long it takes a peacock to become reproductive. What else is, so we've got error bars, we've got questions of how long were the chicks tracked in the wild. What else? There's something particularly arbitrary about one of these plots.
I guess the percent survivability, because how did they know that they just couldn't find one, or how did they know that it didn't survive?
Okay, so for percent survival, right, how do they track these chicks? Do they actually have GPS transponders? Probably not. This is a study done a while ago. So yeah, how did they know what percentage of chicks they actually recovered? So some methodological related questions that you might want to know about to be able to determine or interpret this plot. Why is it important that we look at the weight of individuals on day 84? What's special about day 84? I don't know if there's anything special about day 84. They've just, so it might be that they said, it's the 84th day. Maybe they were measuring, I'm just trying to be a little bit skeptical here, and I'm urging you to be skeptical when you see these sorts of plots. Maybe they measured the chicks every day for 90 days.
It seems like 2 is also not a good year because I looked it up and it says 2 is the age where the peahens reach maturity, but the peacocks don't reach maturity until age 3, which is when their tail is full grown and would be least beneficial.
Okay, so they've not, so you're saying that Google or something has told you that males don't reach reproductive maturity until age 3. And right here, we're just looking at survival to age 2 of males. So that's important to know. So what we're looking for when we're looking for sexually selected traits are traits that correlate with some measure of male or individual, in this case, fitness, survivability, weight, something that would be a signal, a good signal, an honest signal to a female about the quality of the mates that they're trying to choose. So we can look at something similar in stickleback fish. Most stickleback fish, when they're adults, most of the year they look like this. They're just a silvery fish. But in this case, most three-spine sticklebacks, when they're male, when they're mature males, in spring their throats turn bright red and their eyes get blue. And those are signals to females that the males are reproductively healthy. So that signals females, females love the males with the bright red throats and the blue eyes. That's what tells the females that the males are sexually mature and that they're ready to mate. So this is a nice thing as long as this system works. I'll show you in a second how this system breaks down and what happens. So in this case, again, sticklebacks, you get the same sort of trend. If you measure the color intensity, this is a little bit subjective. You take pictures of stickleback males when they're reproductive, and then you have a little color chart, and you just match up the picture with the color chart, which has a numerical scale on it, and you say how red is this part of the throat compared to a standard color chart. So that's what this color intensity metric is. So bright red would be a 10, no red at all would be a 0. Presumably you don't choose people that are red-green colorblind to do these sorts of assays. So I'm just describing to you what other people have told me. And then there's some sort of positive correlation with health index. So how do you measure the health of a three-spine stickleback male? So we've got color on this axis, and somehow, whatever this health index means, there's a correlation. In this case, health index was a measure of parasitism, or parasite load, where an individual that had fewer parasites had a brighter red color, and males that had more parasites tended to have a lower intensity red throat. So again, this is likely to be a sexually selected trait, the red throat, because it's a signal to females that can be selected on. The red throat is an honest signal that tells females, without having to actually know anything, obviously, sticklebacks don't talk. Males aren't going to advertise, oh, I've got a lot of parasites, come mate with me. But this is a signal that correlates for females that are choosing males, his health. So what does it mean to you as a female? Imagine you're a female if you're not. What does it mean to you if you're a female? Why would you want to choose a male that has fewer parasites to mate with?
So he doesn't pass the parasites to you?
So the male doesn't pass the parasites to you. Or to your offspring. It turns out that these parasites are ingested, so they're not inherited directly through, for example, fertilization. They're not intracellular parasites, they're macroparasites.
I think it goes more with nutrition to the sperm itself, so it would be detrimental to the female by not having it,
Okay, so there's something about, so if the male is infected with parasites, maybe that's a signal that he's spending some of his metabolic energy fighting off the parasites, and therefore maybe his sperm is of lesser quality, not as motile, maybe he won't be able to fertilize, his sperm won't be able to fertilize the eggs as well as sperm from other males, maybe. So if you're the way stickleback females mate, I've told you previously, I think, is that they swim into the male's nest and then they spawn their eggs. They release the eggs into the male's nest and then the male swims through the nest and fertilizes. So the female actually has to choose, if there's any intention to it at all, wants to choose a male that has sperm that could actually fertilize the eggs, because she's choosing to put all of her eggs in one basket, the male's nest, and if she happens to choose a male that doesn't have good quality sperm, then that's it for that huge investment she put into producing a huge mass, multiple eggs. I mean, females spawn 50, 100, 150 eggs at a time in sticklebacks. So it could have something to do with that. The other concept that some scientists have proposed, it's not necessarily fact, it's a story, is the idea that if a male has a lot of parasites, that might tell you something about his immune system. So, which is a very similar concept to this idea about how much energy is the male putting into fighting off the parasites. But if he has to do that much to fight off the parasites in the first place, maybe that's a signal to the female that it's not a good place to reproduce. high parasite load, and males that aren't genetically suited, genetically disposed to fighting off the parasites. We've got some pictures of some male sticklebacks with various types of parasites in them. We've got gross, weird eye parasite going on. It's not supposed to be blobby all around the eye. We've got, I should talk to Dr. Crosby about which parasites these likely are. I know some of them, but maybe next semester, oh, you're going to be graduated by then. Next semester, sticklebacks live in the San Joaquin River, so we could go up to Friant and collect sticklebacks and see what sort of parasites they have.
We just did that, parasitology.
Ah! What sort of parasites were there? Schistocephalus? Yeah, that's the main, that's what, I'm not sure those two that I circled are. That's definitely schistocephalus. Anyway, this is not a parasitology class, but. So if you're a female, females like to mate with larger males, but then some of the larger males here are also the parasite-infested ones, and they're larger in part because there's an adult parasite living inside them. So that makes body size in sticklebacks maybe not such a good signal of male quality, but throat color is, definitely. Okay, so then there's the question of female preference. So how does female preference for red evolve? So if there's communication, like you and me right now, it's a two-way street. I have to give you information, and then you have to be able to receive it. So you have to be able to understand English, for example, understand what I'm saying. What about females in stickleback populations makes them prefer red? So it's likely genetic. So there's a genetic predisposition for females to prefer the color red. So males turn red, females prefer red. Then we've got a chicken and the egg question, which came first? Was it the red signal and females then evolved to prefer red? Or did females prefer red colors and then males happen to gain a mutation that made them produce red pigment in their throats? We don't know which is true, but the concept here in evolution is called sensory bias or sensory drive. The concept here is that sticklebacks of both sexes like to eat small invertebrates that are in the water, and they also particularly like crustaceans like brine shrimp. That's what most scientists feed them in the lab, is just freeze-dried. Sea monkeys, you know, you order them from the catalog and then you grow them in the aquarium, little tiny invertebrates. They're red. They have a lot of carotenoid pigments in them. So sticklebacks in the wild, before red throats necessarily evolved, were already eating red prey. So presumably it was pretty easy then for the males to evolve a trait like red throat color that females were already sort of genetically attuned to. Females already preferred looking for things that were red because they were looking for prey that was red. And then if a male signal occurs that's also red, the females already have that basis for detecting that color. They're already sensitive, they're already in tune with looking for things that are red. But then, we get a change. So a new population of sticklebacks is discovered where instead of turning red when they're ready to mate, the males turn jet black in their entire body. And these are sympatric. So there are lakes in British Columbia where you find both stickleback males that turn red and stickleback males that turn black when they're ready to mate. So why would this sort of a difference evolve? Red is ancestral. So if you go out into the ocean, stickleback males turn red when they're ready to mate. These freshwater populations, like in Innis Lake, this black male, they're derived from the marine ancestors. So some red throat turning fish went into the lake, they got stuck there, now they can't leave. There's a population that's been living there for hundreds of years. But now those males turn black instead of red. So they evolved a new color that signals females when they're mature.
How is it different?
good fitness.
Did their diet change?
Diet stayed the same, but there was an evolution. There was an environmental and ecological change that caused this, presumably.
Their isolation
So-
caused the change.
Isolation is a part of the change that allowed a new trait to develop.
Was it like sun time? Oh wait, are you talking about?
So why would it be beneficial if there's already a signal that tells females when you're ready to mate? What sort of thing could cause a change in that color? Okay, so red's a bright signal. So it could be there's a predatory Enos lake that also likes spotting things that are red to eat. So maybe all the males that turn red when it's in March, April, early spring, all the males turn red, and then all the predators say, ooh, look at all these flashy fish, they eat them all. Right? Select against males that turn red when they're ready to mate. That's not necessarily the case here, but that's just as good of a potential answer as what most scientists think is actually what happened. Was that Enos Lake is not clear like the marine ancestral environment. There are some of these environments where males turn black, where the water's kind of muddy or tea-stained from all of the vegetable plant material that falls into the lake and then degrades. So it's kind of a brownish, muddy water. So if you're trying to attract a mate and bring them to your nest, in that sort of environment, it's sort of creepy. Would you rather have a red throat or a black throat? The contrast between red and that muddy colored, tea-stained colored water is not a very high contrast. So it's hard to see red in that environment. But black stands out because there's much more contrast between a black male and the color of the water. And that's the leading hypothesis for what happened in this case, was that there was an ecological change. The sticklebacks find themselves in a new environment where that signal isn't as useful a signal, then you get evolution of a new signal.
Are they still as reproductively successful as they were when they were red?
Yes, and in fact, females from these populations now prefer black males. So you can put... Maybe it's time for a drawing.
And that could be because that trait can be passed on to their offspring because of pre-copulatory predators.
Right. So this is a genetic trait that's heritable, and so it's able to be passed on. So if you give a female from the black population a choice of mating with a red male or a black male, and if you give a female from a red population the same choice, what happens? This is what's called assortative mating. When this is how you know whether or not there's been a shift in the female preference. So females from the black population now will choose, if you give them two males, they'll choose to mate with a male from their own population. Males that turn black instead of turn red. And the same is true of females from the red populations. They prefer red-throated males. So not only has the male signal evolved, but also the female preference for that signal has changed.
The question would be then how did that even evolve? Because I mean, if in the beginning they were isolated and nothing but red females would want red males, but the red males wouldn't be able to, I guess, express themselves.
Well, it was probably more difficult at first. So if you find yourself in that new environment and you've got a sexual signal like a red throat, maybe some mating must have happened,
Yeah.
clearly, because those populations are still here. So we know that mating happened. Maybe it just didn't happen as effectively. But as soon as one male randomly happened to get that black throat color, then his lineage exploded, took off, because they were so much better at mating. But that, again, this is a really difficult question for evolutionary geneticists to address, in part because it's that chicken and the egg. So once a male turns black, if he turns black-throated when he's ready to mate in a population of females that prefer red, then how did his mutation that causes black throats get passed on? How did he mate at all? He would have been at the bottom rung of the choices of males to mate with.
Would it even go as far as the females, like receptors on eyes actually?
Right. So it's likely that there was a female then that also in the population that had a preference for black just by chance, and that those two got together and by chance, and had offspring that had both females' preference for black and then males the ability to produce black throats when they're ready to mate.
Maybe it already existed, like that predisposition to red and black, so they all had it, and then when this one black male
Sure.
showed up, it worked out for him by chance.
Right. So that's, yeah, exactly right. So that's a possibility, that there was already a preference for black males randomly, not by need, but by chance in the population. And that when that black-throated male happened to spontaneously arise because of mutation, there was already a female in the population that preferred that over red. I'm going to show you one more example of how scientists figure out something I wondered early on. So how do you know, first of all, this is really difficult for me. How do you know what population you're in? Because fish don't have mirrors, so they can't see, like males don't know if they're in the red population or the black population. They can't see what color their throats are. So how do you tell whether or not a fish prefers one color over the other? So we have to do behavioral assays. And one of those is called an optomotor assay. It's a really simple principle. And although it's black and white, this is what you do. So there's a small juvenile swimming in here, and there's just a series of LED lights that are turning on and off in a pattern, and you can see what the fish is doing. And this is an innate behavior in most fish, just in general. That if there's something that's moving, fish have a schooling tendency, most fish do. So if that fish, oh look, you can see, apparently I like you too. Fish like to school, and so they have this innate behavior where they will follow a pattern to try to stay with the school. They don't know that the lights aren't fish, although you can do this with other sorts of patterns too, not just light. So what you do if you want to know if a fish likes red versus blue or something like that is you just change the color of those LED lights. And if the fish is not able to detect a color, then it won't display that swimming behavior. So you can tell, does this female, so you stick a female in a breeding assay. You give her a red male choice or a black male choice. And the female chooses the black male. One of the things you want to know is the female actually able to detect the color red? Did she not choose the red male because she can't see red? Or because she's actually making a distinction between red versus black? So if you want to know if a fish can see a color, you put her, for example, in one of these optomotor assays with red LEDs. And if she can see red, then she will exhibit that pattern where she swims in a circle along with the rotating pattern. Yes. So in this case, if you put females or males in that sort of optomotor assay, and you can do it this way as well. You take a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket or something like that. A bucket that's got white and black stripes, and then you shine a colored light. You just use a filter. You shine a light through a filter so that these white areas appear whatever color of light is shining down into this bucket. And you spin the bucket slowly, and you ask, does the fish swim along with the bucket in the same motion, or does it not? And that's how you can tell whether or not fish can detect certain colors of light. And yes, females can detect red light. And even in the black populations, females can still detect red. They prefer black, even though they can see red. And this plot just gets back to that concept about how does the watercolor affect sexual signals. Males that live in redder water, there's a trend again. So there's a color bar here at the bottom of the chart that shows the wavelengths of light or the color of light that these sticklebacks live in. And so if you live in redder water, males that are found in those environments tend to have less, not intensity of red, but the amount of area on their throats that turns color when they're ready to mate is smaller. So males that live in red environments basically put less effort into making a bright red throat, a big bright red throat. Whereas if they live in waters that are shifted more towards 590 wavelengths of light, non-red, then they produce larger areas of red color on their throats. And interestingly, when you do that optomotor assay on the females, they show the opposite pattern where they're less sensitive to the color red when they live in red wavelengths of light. So you take females from tea-stained colored water and you put them in the optomotor assay, they don't do it as well. They're not as sensitive to the color red. You take females from clear water environments like marine females and put them in an optomotor assay, they spin right around with the red pattern. They easily detect red light. So there is some differentiation in these females between whether they can detect red and where they live. So if you're a female with black males in a red water environment, males produce less red throats and the females prefer the color red less. So this is how intersexual, between the sex, selection can work. So environment changes which sort of signal the males produce, red versus black, and that signal then affects the females as well. So it helps them evolve new detection preferences. So that's intersexual, between the sexes. We'll do a really brief intersexual, rather, between sex, sorry. Male versus female sticklebacks, between sex selection. This is intrasexual, within sex, so male versus male competition. And this is not having anything to do with weapons, this has to do with being a sneaker. And this is a great example from your textbook. This is specifically talking about a different type of fish, bluegill sunfish. Not all fish species do this. This is actually really cool. So you can have parents, again, we have males that build nests, and then they try to attract females, and here's a female that's spawning her eggs in a male's nest. And there's a male that's going, as soon as the female spawns her eggs, the male is going to fertilize the eggs. There are two different types of alternative morphs or forms of males in this population. You've got the parental males, you've got sneaker males, and you've got satellite males. So three different types of males. You've got the ones that are actually doing all the work to build the nests and attract mates. So they're putting all the effort into mating, courtship. The sneakers look like males, but they're smaller, so they can't really compete against the big males that are the parental type males. So these sneaker males hang out literally off by the side, and as soon as the female spawns her eggs, the sneaker males do what? They sneak in and they release their sperm too, and they hope that some of their sperm happen to land on eggs before the parental male's sperm does. So you get one female spawning eggs and then a mixed brood, different parents, different male parents. And then we've got the satellite. This is even more bizarre. In this species, the bluegill sunfish, there's a third type of male, a satellite male, who phenotypically looks like they're female. So this is a strategy. So externally, they're male. They're all male down there where it counts. But grossly, their somatic tissue, the rest of the body, looks female. And then they do basically the same thing that sneakers do. So that male swims in with a breeding pair, and then the parental male is like, yeah, okay, it's another female, cool. So the parental male doesn't try to fight off the satellite male because it looks like a female. And then what does the satellite male do? Same thing as the sneaker male. He sidles up next to the breeding pair and releases some sperm too. So different strategies have evolved to get fitness even though you're not the biggest or the best fed, have the most energy, able to do all the courtship, building a nest, and those sorts of things. So that's one example of how competition within the sexes evolves, and some different traits related to that. All right, so we've got 5 minutes left. I want to move past this graph, which just basically shows that the sneaker males do actually sire some offspring in this process, so they are actually successful. Really brief, one question writing activity, don't spend more than 5 minutes on it, certainly. I just wanted to get your feedback on this one point. So I'm going to give you, it's a really brief scenario, take a look at it and just jot down a couple of thoughts. First things that come to your mind, don't write full sentences necessarily. So this is more of an example of what might show up on the final, something I've written. Okay. And when you're done with that, we're certainly done for today, and I'll see you on Friday.